Hi, this is Janet Diane Moria-Swerdlow for Expansions.com, and as you can see, I'm going solo today. Stuart is traveling, and of course we don't know where, maybe some intergalactic galaxy someplace. Anyway, this is the Expansions.com podcast for the third week in July of 2019. Now, the big news, of course, is pedophilia all over the place, and this time it's billionaire Jeffrey Epstein, who has offered to live under house arrest at his $77 million mansion with armed guards that he pays for, an electric monitor, and a sizable bond if he's released on bail. And he's, of course, is urging the court to not discriminate against him because he is rich. Now, you will remember, I'm sure you've been reading about this because it is all over the news, that Epstein entered a not guilty plea last week, just hours after it was revealed that an extraordinary volume of photographs of nude and partially nude young women or girls was discovered by agents during their search of Epstein's Manhattan mansion. Federal prosecutors requested that Epstein remain in prison ahead of trial. However, he is trying to get out. A number of those photographs appear to be of underage girls, and some photos were discovered in a locked safe. Now, this indictment states that Epstein enticed and recruited and caused to be enticed and recruited minor girls at his mansion in Manhattan and his estate in Palm Beach to engage in sex acts with him. There were dozens of these underage girls, according to the indictment, who had received hundreds of dollars after being forced into sex acts, as the indictment states, finding others to engage in sex acts with Epstein. Now, Epstein also paid certain of his victims to recruit additional girls to be similarly abused by Epstein, according to the court filing. In this way, Epstein created a vast network of underage victims for him to sexually exploit. Now, there are lots of questions surrounding Epstein, and I've done a lot of reading and a lot of research. But a lot of people want to know, who is he, where did he come from, and where did his money come from? So after I read all of the articles that I was doing my research on, it came to me that there has to be somebody behind him that's backing him. Now, there is question about whether or not he even owns the $77 million home in Manhattan that he claims to own. And a couple of people were given as his backers in some of the articles I read. However, after my research, I came across this article, which made a lot of sense to me. And this was by author Vicky Ward. And she states that Alexander Acosta, who was the former U.S. attorney in Miami, who infamously cut Epstein a non-prosecution plea deal back in 2007, he stated that Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. So, of course, in all the reading that you have done, you probably know that this is not the first time that Epstein has been arrested with charges, which I'm going to tell you about in a minute. Anyway, Vicky Ward goes on to say that Alexander Acosta, who I mentioned, the former U.S. attorney in Miami who cut this non-prosecution deal with Epstein in 2007, was being interviewed for the job of labor secretary. He was asked if the Epstein case was going to cause a problem for the confirmation hearings, and he replied that back in the day he'd had just one meeting on the Epstein case. He'd cut the non-prosecution deal with one of Epstein's attorneys because he had been told to back off, and that Epstein was above his pay grade. I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone, he told his interviewers in the Trump transition team, who evidently thought that was a sufficient answer and went ahead and hired Acosta. Now, in 2007 and 2008, the FBI had prepared a 53-page indictment to charge Epstein with sex crimes. However, after the one meeting with the then U.S. Attorney Acosta, he said the indictment was shelved, and instead Epstein signed a non-prosecution agreement with federal prosecutors, pleading guilty to one count of solicitation of prostitution and one count of procurement of minors for prostitution, which earned him only 13 months, and there's your number, 13, in county jail. However, he was allowed to leave to go to his office and for work and to go on walks. His associates included heads of state, entrepreneurs, academics, research scientists, celebrities, and numerous beautiful women. And of course, they talk about Ghislaine Maxwell, who's the daughter of media mogul Robert Maxwell, who was actually born Jan Ludwig Hyman Benjamin Hock. Robert Maxwell, who's head of the Mir group of newspapers, was alleged to be a Mossad agent by Seymour Hersh in his 1991 book on Israel's nuclear program called The Samson Option. Maxwell denied the charge. He sued Hersh for libel, but he died in November of 91, so the suit died with him, and then Hersh countersued and eventually received an apology and a settlement. In 2002, Gordon Thomas and Martin Dillon wrote a book called Robert Maxwell, Israel's Super Spy, which states definitively that he was a Mossad agent. Now, all of this has led to speculation that Ghislaine Maxwell has Mossad connections as well. She was instrumental in procuring young girls for Epstein, and according to the testimony of several of the girls involved, they not only service Epstein, but Maxwell as well. Also, their associates, including Prince Andrew, Alan Dershowitz, and other powerful players. Now, this makes me wonder, when Trump met with the Queen not too long ago, if that this topic of Prince Andrew perhaps came into their discussion. The girls apparently were asked to bring back reports on their liaisons, which were sometimes filmed with hidden cameras. And of course, all of that looks like high-end blackmail operations, with Epstein and Maxwell skimming sex off the top for their own, supposedly, pleasure. Ann Coulter said she believes that Epstein may have a state sponsor and was running an obvious blackmailing operation. She says Epstein, according to both the girls' accounts, he wanted them to have sex with powerful men, come back to him and report on it, describe what they wanted, what their fetishes were, and he had cameras throughout the house, so this is obviously for blackmailing purposes. Now, of course, the Clintons are tied into the Epstein, whatever you want to call it, affair at this point, I guess, in a variety of ways, including some people saying that he actually had started the Clinton Foundation. Now, Bill Clinton and Hillary attended the Billy Joel concert this past week, where the singer dedicated a song to them and flashed their pictures up on the screen at Madison Square Gardens because they were in attendance. So initially, the crowd cheered, and then it turned to boos. And as you know, the former First Lady, Hillary, has been under scrutiny for years, criticizing President Trump and trying to explain why she lost to him in the 2016 elections. Now, Clinton, on the other hand, was known to have a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. And of course, they denied that he had any knowledge of Epstein's crimes, and claiming that he took a total of 4 trips with Epstein in 2002 and 2003. However, journalist Conchita Sarnoff, who first broke the Epstein story back in 2010, says that the number of flights is not accurate, claiming that Clinton was a guest on Epstein's planes many more times over a longer period. She went over the pilot logs, and the pilot logs, of course, are written by different pilots, and according to her calculations, he was a guest of Epstein on his plane 27 times. So, that tells a different story. Now, also, interestingly enough, which I didn't know, there was a Broadway depiction of the lives of President Bill Clinton and former First Lady Hillary, called Hillary and Clinton, which was scheduled to close July 21st of this year. However, its final performance was held on Sunday, June 23rd, because not enough people were interested in attending. So obviously their popularity is plunging. And speaking of that, they had a 13-city tour, 13, there's your number again, at a 13-city tour that was scheduled back in May, and apparently their prices of their tickets were going for as little as $20 on the secondary markets to try and fill the audience seats in the places they were speaking. In fact, in Seattle, it said that at one time the seats were $1,785, and they were at least a 54% drop down to $800 from when the tour was first announced last November. And they are still having problems filling they still had problems filling it. So they're history, and it's going to keep going on. This Epstein story is going to be the story that doesn't quit. So continue to watch that, and we will continue to update you on the findings, but there's so much to read out there. It's like, who is going to be announced next to be involved, and what exactly is going on, and what will happen behind the scenes. We will find out, hopefully. And President Trump, who, as you may remember, said that the White House would no longer deal with the British ambassador who called inept, disinvited him from his dinner with the Qatari Emir, and also attacked outgoing UK Prime Minister Theresa May over the Brexit mess. Well, now Sir Kim Darroch has resigned. So he says that he no longer, it says it's impossible for me to carry out my role as I would like. So there's another person who is history. And in Mississippi, a female reporter has accused a Republican gubernatorial candidate of sexism after he refused her request to shadow him on the campaign trail. Apparently, Representative Robert Foster, who is a Republican, Hernando, told Larison Campbell of Mississippi that her presence might stoke speculation about an affair between the two. He offered her an opportunity to follow him, but she would need a male colleague accompanying her. And both she and her editor agreed that the request was sexist and an unnecessary use of resources. However, Foster defended his decision, citing an agreement with his wife to abide by what he called the Billy Graham rule, which I have not heard of before. But he said the Billy Graham rule is to avoid any situation that may evoke suspicion or compromise of our marriage, and I happen to agree with him on this one, especially during this Me Too movement times when people are so quick, even, dozens of years, decades later, to say something happened. So he's very smart. So during a radio interview, Foster said that he abided by the same rule in his business and that he would rather be called names by the liberal press than to be put in a situation where it could do damage to my marriage or my family. So I say kudos to Mr. Foster. And Angela Merkel, shaking once again. A third incident, this time in Berlin, alongside of Finland's prime minister. Now, in a press conference last week, Mrs. Merkel said she was working through what happened during the military honors when she was shaking alongside President Zelensky of the Ukraine. Then she went on to say, this process is clearly not finished yet, but there is progress, and I must live with this for a while, but I am very well, and you don't need to worry about me. I told you before, this reminds me of Hillary when she had all of her episodes. And in my opinion, I think she's got an implant that they press a button on and she shakes, because nobody can shake like that and remain standing. It's impossible. So I don't know what's happening there, but something very, very weird and odd. And moving on to Russia. Russia approved a 1,250-mile highway through its territory, which will connect China to Europe under Xi Jinping's scheme to dominate global trade. This is going to be a privately financed road that will run from the Belarus border to the Kazakhstani frontier. Construction has already begun, and it's expected to take between 12 and 14 years. Now, speaking of China, China's military vehicles are deployed on European soil for the first time ever, as the People's Liberation Army takes part in war games in Germany. Who would have ever thought? Apparently, the German and Chinese forces are taking part in an exercise called Combined Aid with medical service units so they are better disposed to respond to a humanitarian crisis. The move comes amidst President Xi's so-called Belt and Road Initiative, which is a move to firm up stronger road and sea links from China to Europe with an aim of helping his nation dominate world trade. So I didn't know what the Belt and Road Initiative was, and in light of their troops now working with Germany, I looked that up, and it said that the Belt and Road Initiative is a global development strategy adopted by the Chinese government involving infrastructure development and investments in 152 countries and international organizations. Now listen to this. Asia, Europe, the Middle East, okay, that's close. Also Africa and the Americas. So they're moving along all over the world. It was known as One Belt, One Road until 2016, when the Chinese government considered the emphasis on the word one was prone to misinterpretation. So, and that reminds me, of course, of one world government. The project has a targeted completion date of 2049, which coincides with the 100th anniversary of the People's Republic of China. And I have told you before that China is buying real estate up all over the world. In fact, when I visited in the Midwest a couple of years ago with some of my family in a very small town down in the corner of the state of Missouri, they told me that Chinese people were down there buying real estate and people didn't know why. But they weren't the ones that were presenting the deals. They would talk to local people, have them make the deals, and the Chinese would come in and pay for the real estate. So very, very strange things going on with China. Watch that, or maybe learn Chinese. Now, I'm sure you've also seen by now the woman who was licking ice cream and putting it back on the shelves. And I didn't look to see what was happening. The last I heard, they had found her, and I don't know if they're prosecuting her or what. But I always tell you, monkey see, monkey do. So now it's happening. And I didn't put this in my credits or my resources, but you can look it up. They showed a woman spitting in mouthwash and putting it back. They showed a man spitting in a bottle of tea and putting it on the shelves. They showed a daughter with her mother in a doctor's office licking tongue depressors and putting them back. And I want to say, really? Are these people humans or are they animals? What's going on? This is so silly in my opinion. But people see it and they do it. So that's why they show you these visuals. So with this in mind, I call this following section about dividing and conquering us, because that's what they're doing, and people are acting like animals, and it's going to make either people sick or who knows what the structure they've got going on. So divide and conquer, so keep that in mind. Now, in Detroit, this article was sent to me from a person in the UK, and then I actually saw it on some of our news as well. Detroit, here in the state of Michigan, there is an organization. Let me see where I have the name. It's Afro Future Fest in the Grosse Pointe Park section of Detroit on August 3rd. Have a music festival planned. And they invited a woman named Tiny Jag, her real name Jillian Graham, who is actually from that area, to perform. Well, it turns out that Jillian Graham found out that the organizers were charging white people twice as much as minorities for tickets. Now, the organizers of Afro Future Fest, they claim that they had threats from white supremacist and racist comments on Instagram. It's like, you think? This is reverse discrimination at its finest. And, here in the U.S., it is illegal to discriminate for race. So therefore, you are discriminating against white people. It's ridiculous. But this woman is biracial, so she has a white grandmother. So then she said her family, she wasn't going to ask her family to pay twice as much for their tickets on the white side as the black side. So she pulled out. So kudos to you, because that's saying I'm not going to be part of this game. So I applaud this woman, Tiny Jag, aka Jillian Graham as her natal name. Anyway, the reason the organizers stated for giving this price structure is to ensure that people of color are provided with an equitable chance at enjoying events in their own community. Now, I happen to know black people or people of color of various colors that make a lot more money than I do. So you cannot assume because they're people of color that they don't have money. That's putting people down. That's not elevating them, and that's not doing anything to help anybody. Anyway, this event, they were calling them non-people of color, which to me, non-people, what are we if we're not a person? So non-people. So they call them non-POC tickets, or non-people of color. $20 for an early bird ticket, and then early bird POC, if you are a people of color ticket, would cost $10. So I want to say I'm insulted because, as I've told you before, I have American Indian in me, I have Sub-Saharan African in me, I have a lot of things, and so many people are biracial anymore, with a big mix, especially here in the US and really all over the world now. So this is really a horrible thing. So divide and conquer. And then I was telling you about monkey see, monkey do. Well, there was a couple of videos I saw. One was a white woman telling a Puerto Rican customer that I hope Trump deports you, because this woman, the Puerto Rican customer, spoke Spanish to a friend at a grocery store. And this happened in actually the state of Pennsylvania here in the US. And then she implied that the woman was paying with drug money. And of course this clip went viral because that's what they wanted to do. So everybody else will start yelling at people who are speaking Spanish to divide us further. But I'm sure you know the Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens with all the same rights that we have here in the country where we live. They can travel wherever they want, and they can speak whatever language they want. And then in Florida, one of Stewart's favorite states, there were two older white ladies telling an Orlando Burger King manager to go back to Mexico when they hear him speaking Spanish, and he also was Puerto Rican. So I'm just telling you, these are ways they show it, and people do it, and next thing you know, they're all over the internet. It's like when women were breastfeeding, and I told you that I breastfed my boys, never had a problem. Then that became the thing to, get upset with women who were breastfeeding in public. Now they're doing this with people who speak Spanish. So one thing and then another. Now, this next story happens it's about divide and conquer, but it has to be one of my most favorite. And if Stuart was here, he would be rolling on the floor, I'm sure. This is about a gay group of women who were wearing "lesbians are women" on their t-shirts. They were removed by police from the National Theatre bar, this is in London, after a transgender staff member was offended by them. So apparently the theater said the women were disruptive because it had banned campaign material. So why they're calling this campaign material, I don't know, because the women said that this was a definition of lesbian from the dictionary. So the bottom line was that police were called to remove a bunch of sober, peaceful women, mostly lesbians, for no reason other than responding to a question from a member of staff with an answer that did not align with the staff's political beliefs. And the issue was that the transgender woman was upset because the lesbians believed that women don't have penises. Okay? So, apparently this was a distinction that is going around in the LGBT community between trans women and lesbian women. And apparently there's a group, it's called Get the L Out group, that states on its website that the new queer LGBT politics coerces lesbians to accept the fact that the penis is a female organ. And they promote heterosexual intercourse between male and female as a form of lesbian sex. Sorry, this is so ridiculous even to me. But this is what's going on. People say, well, you only report on things that are sensational. This is what's going on in your backyard. This is just so ridiculous. So the National Theatre said they did not give that the lesbians did not give prior notice that they would be wearing campaign material, and added that they wouldn't tolerate, the National Theatre would not tolerate disruptive behavior. So the lesbian women put placards with controversial slogans that said, "Lesbian visibility, children need therapy, not puberty blocker hormones and therapy, and transing children is abusive." So one of the people in this lesbian group said her group was not disruptive, and that the bar even served a man who was with them but refused to serve the women because of their t-shirts and their little placards. So anyway, it's just so funny to me. I'm sorry, this is so ridiculous. It's just so ridiculous. It's beyond ridiculous. Oh dear. And those of you who want to talk all the time about ELF bombardment and is it real? Well, here we have the city of Philadelphia talking about using sonic weapons to keep kids away from the parks. Apparently, city officials in Philadelphia are under attack for their increasing use of an acoustic deterrent, which is described by a local councilwoman as a sonic weapon to keep the city's children and young adults away from certain recreational areas at night. This sonic weapon is called the mosquito. It was actually invented in the UK back in 2005, and apparently in North America, the distributor is based in Canada, and the distributor describes it as a small speaker that produces a high-frequency sound, much like the buzzing of the insect. This high frequency can be heard by young people ages 13 to 25 years old, reaches out as far as 130 feet depending on the volume set. Now, how do they determine this? I think this is totally bizarre, but this is what they're saying. The hearing deteriorates with age. Of course, when you're old, when you're like over 25, you're old and decrepit, and you're ready for the nursing home. So older people cannot hear the frequency, and so therefore it works on younger people. Now, this is the city of Philadelphia, mind you. The frequencies that are emitted by this device, which costs about $5,000, and the city of Philadelphia has been using it since 2014 in 31 locations. 31 is the reverse of 13, to prevent loitering and vandalism. Now, city officials have deemed the technology to be safe. However, overseas, for example, in Germany, they report that although the risk to teenagers is relatively low for smaller children, there's a risk from lengthy exposure with adults unable to hear and move away. So this means if the adults can't hear it, it's still affecting them, but they're claiming in Germany that the onset of dizziness, headache, nausea, and impairment is to be expected. And the Council of Europe actually went further and demanded a ban on the device, which does inflict, they're saying, acoustic pain on young people, and they treat them as unwanted birds or pests. They call the technology harmful, highly offensive health hazard that is neither politically acceptable nor consistent with the safeguard of fundamental human rights, and legislative measures should be taken throughout Europe against the marketing of such devices, and their use in public places should be banned. And apparently, Philadelphia does not agree, and apparently officials there claim that there has been a reduction in nuisance crimes, which they attribute to the devices. So keep that in mind. Now, moving on with, in my opinion, again, more discrimination. In Arizona, an ex-Arizona teacher was sentenced to 20 years in prison for sex with a 13-year-old boy. 6th grade, 13 years old, and there's our 1-3-13. This woman's 28 years old, married, no children, and she has apologized to the victims of her actions, and all their relatives and her own relatives. She told the judge that her actions were out of character and she would like to attend counseling. However, the judge sentenced her 20 years in prison and not even parole for good behavior. So, and I agree, this person had a problem. And like we're talking about pedophilia, here we go again. It's all over the news. Teachers and people in positions of trust are abusing that with the youngsters. So the parents found out that this woman was having sex with their son, and they began to monitor his phone with an app, and they collected the evidence, and she was actually arrested about a year ago. Well, the trial, of course, is just now coming to light. So even on one occasion, the woman this ex-teacher asked an 11-year-old boy who was a friend of the 13-year-old to stand watch during an encounter in her classroom. So the child's mother said she used her position of power to molest a child. She's a pedophile and no different than if a man were sitting in her place right now, which I happen to agree. However, the 20-year sentence, I would question that. However, next, moving on, now we have another teacher, this time in Ohio, who's 27 years old, who had sex with a female student who is 17. Okay, so the first woman, I agree, there's a difference between a 13-year-old and a 17-year-old, but again, it's still a teacher. She is in a position of power, and she's abused it. So in Ohio, the woman, the ex-teacher, 27, pleaded guilty to gross sexual imposition, and she faced up to only 18 months behind bars. Why did this other woman get 20 years? And now this was the thing that just blew me away, because the judge was a female. She said that this woman was not a sexual predator despite having sex when the girl was underage, because the girl who was underage was willing. I've heard this before, and this is just totally bizarre, because an underage child can be willing to do a lot of things that they do not understand the consequences of. But the judge said that this was different and this was unique, and therefore she only gave her a probation sentence of 1 year. And I don't understand the discrepancy. I think it's all bad, and if the one woman got 20 years, this woman should have 20 years. That's my feeling about it. Now, speaking of child abuse, the next story I'm going to tell you is a little lengthy, but it's a very important story. And in fact, it's everything I'm reading about it said this could even become a landmark case in the debate on child gender affirmation in the U.S. This is about a father in Texas who has been legally prohibited from raising his son as a boy because his ex-wife alleges that their son is a transgender girl, and the ex-wife is preparing him for chemical castration, get this, at age 8, and a future sex change surgery, which the father may be forced to help pay for. The father's name is Jeff Younger. He says a court order bans him from discussing things like religion or the need for his son to be respectful to girls. Now, his Make sure I'm on the right page. Yep. So this man and his former spouse. Now get this. The former spouse is a pediatrician. The pediatrician has a lot of money to take him to court and fight all this, and Jeff Younger is a regular father out there working like a lot of us do, and he doesn't have a lot of money to fight this, so he has actually a fundraise, and there will be links in this article if you want to contribute to his fund to help him with his legal battle. The mother, this pediatrician, insists that the son identifies as a girl, and let me see where I have this. Yeah, she says, according to her, that since the age of 3, the mother changed his appearance by dressing him in girl clothes and calling him Luna. She enrolled him in an elementary school as a girl, and the teachers and faculty know his correct gender but call him Luna by request of the mother. So, let's see, where are we? Okay, the mother envisions hormone therapy and eventually a sex change surgery for this young man. Now, the father rejects the idea and says his son is perfectly comfortable being a boy in his presence. But the order forbids Jeff from calling his son James in front of anyone who knows him as a girl. So the father says, I can't go to school. I have to keep him away from any friends he might have at school that know him as a girl. And at my home, he's known as James, and I use male pronouns. What I'm prohibited from doing right now is trying to convince him that he's actually a boy. Now, Jeff is a religious Orthodox Christian, and he even has to be careful when discussing his faith with his son. He has to be cautious about teaching his son how to behave decently so that his words cannot be interpreted as imposing a male gender identity. So therefore, he says he's had trouble communicating with him on religious issues, on basic things that you would normally teach boys, like about self-control, how to deal with women, older women, being respectful to females of their peer group. And the father says that James was misdiagnosed with gender dysphoria, and he simply wants the approval of both of his parents. So the court sent the boy to social services, so the boy could tell social service his preference, and of course the child's confused, and he said he wants to be a girl at his mom's home and a boy at his dad's home, because basically he wants both of his parents to love him. So, anyway, it's just crazy. It says James is undergoing forced social transitioning therapy to prepare him for a chemical castration when he turns 8. So, let's see. And according to this article, it says that doctors do perform sex change surgeries on children in Texas. They chemically castrate children as young as 8 years old to suppress puberty and prepare children for sex change surgery. And the courts almost always force the non-custodial parent to pay for transgender therapy and sexual mutilation of their own children. If the parent objects, the courts can remove parental rights and incarcerate them, and public schools are also forced with accepting the wishes of the custodial parents. Now, what's interesting is that the father has actually received support from the LGBT community, saying that they are opposed to having this done to a child, which is what I was telling you about the lesbians, and what I have told you all along. You know, we have clients, Stuart and I, that are lesbians, gay people. Before transitioning was a thing, we had a few that were even in a transitioning process, but these were adults, not children. So all of this is about dividing and conquering. They're dividing people, the families, the children are so totally confused. Anyway, this father has support from the LGBT community. Again, I'll repeat, saying they are opposed to this being done as to a child, and they want to view this as an opportunity for people to come together and stand up for protection of a child who's being abused and forced into a gender role that he does not understand, and the consequences will affect his entire life and future. In this article I'm reading, the author writes that we need a law, which is a shame we have to have such a law, that we need a law that will outlaw sex change surgeries for children under the age of 18, outlaw chemical castration by puberty suppression for psychological treatment, while still allowing it for medical treatment, and restrict courts from removing certain parental rights. No loss of rights for affirming the biological sex of a child, and never force parents to pay for transgender therapy of any kind, and never find abuse for affirming a child's biological sex. So I just think it's crazy, 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 and gets crazier. So it's like, okay, this is not sensational news. Again, this is happening in your backyard, and what they do is they put these cases in, and next thing you know, it's everywhere, and it is, and that's the issue. So you got to be aware of these trends, and you have to make choices. And you have children, and you have families, you have grandchildren, nieces, nephews. You know, you've got to stand up for the rights of young people. That's what it's about. We can't expect them to know what's going on. You have a responsibility as an adult. If you haven't read our book, The True Reality of Sexuality, we wrote this back in 2002, believe it or not. Read this book, and also 13 Cubed. It's all about mind control and programming, and that's what they're doing to our youth. It's got to be stopped, and unfortunately, to some people who are a little bit mixed up in their head. So you've got to take care of your own health. Now, I also want to talk to you about a couple other things. One of them is something I'm just going to throw in there because, as you know, right now here in the U.S. we have Hurricane Barry on the Gulf Coast that is striking Louisiana probably as I'm talking to you. But the thing that I found interesting about this is I tell you about how they throw these terms in and they make us think that they have been forever. So this was actually a piece of news before Hurricane Barry was named. But it was important enough, I'm going to tell you about it. And that is, it says that in this article, non-tropical storms that originate over the U.S. mainland and then develop offshore over the Gulf of Mexico or the Atlantic into tropical systems are often referred to by meteorologists as homebrew tropical storms. I never heard that term before, homebrew. So maybe you have. If you have, let me know. But again, I think it's a way of changing history. And as you know, here in the U.S., we have earthquakes that have been shaking us, as well as globally. Volcanic activities going on. Magma is moving all over the place. There are hailstorms in Europe, and I've put pictures on my Facebook page. They're as big as oranges. They're just absolutely unbelievable. And remember, I told you about that one in Guadalajara, Mexico a few weeks ago. That was like, what was it? A meter or meter and a half? 3 to 5 feet of hail that just stopped traffic. It was terrible. So all kinds of weird things are happening. So when you're talking about weather weapons and geological events that are happening, yes, they're out there, and that's why we tell you to work on your mind, because the weather is a reflection. Earthquakes, volcanic activity, hailstorms is still a reflection of your mind pattern, which is what we teach you about on our website, in our classes. You know, find out who we are. I have people say, oh, you don't do your research. You have not a clue how much research we do. So you don't know us and you don't know our work. So if you're going to say stuff like that, trust me, your comment's going in the trash, because we research like 24/7 and we have a lot of connections and we use those. So come to our classes, read our books, get a membership on our website, less than $1 a day, expansions.com, if you want to know what we are about. And not just some, it's fun to just be a little troll out there on the internet, which, hey, that's really easy. It doesn't take any effort at all. So, continuing on, I just have a couple stories left. One, remember I told you about the baptism of Meghan and Harry's child, where they actually put in the article that they use water from the River Jordan. So that's telling you about the different frequencies that they're using. Well, in Colombia, South America, town of Buenaventura, that a Catholic bishop, Monsignor Montoya, has decided that he needs to perform a mass exorcism over the city. And apparently, let me see down here, Colombia's army apparently offered the bishop a helicopter for the mass exorcism during the feast day of Buenaventura's patron saint. So what they're really going to be doing with this ritual, I don't know. But this is publicly what they're saying, is they're trying to save the city that is wrought with evil. And this Monsignor decided this after the brutal murder of a 10-year-old girl in this town. And he's told a local radio station that we want to go around the whole of Buenaventura from the air and pour holy water on to see if we exorcise and get out all those demons that are destroying our port, so that God's blessing comes and gets rid of all the wickedness that is in our streets. Apparently, homicides are up from last year, prompting a pastoral emergency from the Vatican-backed International Association of Exorcists. And I have told you about this before. And I will remind you that earlier this year, the Vatican opened its annual Exorcism Summit to non-Catholics for the first time due to reports of a rise in demonic possessions and devil worship around the world. So, with the rise in these reported demonic possessions and devil worship, in the era of social media, the Roman Catholic Church opened its doors to non-Catholics for the first time ever during its annual exorcism training conference. They had about 250 members attend the week-long intensive course called Exorcism and the Prayer of Liberation, which not only included Catholics, but Anglicans, Lutherans, Greek Orthodox, and Pentecostal churches in the capital city of Italy. An exorcist from Spain, Father Pedro Barron, said Catholics are by no means the only Christians who have developed methods to help possessed people to get rid of a space of evil spirits. This is the first time we have included so many other religious representatives to share how they do this work. We think collaborating will help us create best practices. And while some have mocked or dismissed the experts at the conference, they all have first-hand experience with it. Now, I will tell you again, not only are we putting forth exorcism, and we're putting forth possession, and we're putting forth the devil worship, all of this is still about blending all religions into one new world religion. Okay, and my last story for you. You've probably seen or heard about this one. It'll be interesting to see what happens on September 20th, because there is a Facebook post that is inviting anybody, I guess, to storm the classified military base Area 51 in Nevada to see the aliens. And apparently about 500,000 people have claimed that they are going to this event. And I think about another 500,000 say they're interested in going to this event. So this article came out of the Daily Mail, and it said that they reached out to the Nevada Testing and Training Range, which contains Area 51, about whether the event is being taken seriously. And it doesn't even say if they responded, but they do say that the last known person to trespass at Area 51 was shot dead by guards in January. They indicated of 2019, this year. So what's going to happen with this event, I don't know. Everything's crazy out there, as you know. But it wouldn't surprise me to see a few 100,000 people go out there to see what was going on. Now, if you want to know the truth, you might want to read Blue Blood, True Blood. This is a fabulous book of galactic history. It's one of our bestsellers. And let me see, in here we have, if I can find them. Yes, here we go. We have a lot of pictures of aliens going on in here. So you want to know about aliens and you want to know the truth about a lot of things, you're going to read some of our books. And we have some really good information in here. I don't think I have it. Stewart's autobiography, Montauk Alien Connection. That's a great book to read. So we have lots of things going on out there. You want to work on your mind. You want to get some of our healing books. There's a lot of things that we have offering to you that between Stewart and I, we have decades and decades and lifetimes of experience. So please don't tell us, again, I'm going to repeat myself, please don't tell us that we don't know what we're talking about. We do. And when you say that, we know you don't know what you're talking about, because we are all on this planet together and we are all explorers of consciousness in our own way. And as I tell people, there are many paths to God. So you can choose your path, that's fine, but don't throw stones at other people. That's part of the divide and conquer thing. So no dividing, no conquering. Let's just all do our own thing and let's have one world peace, because first you have to find peace within yourself. Then you can move out a little bit. So let's not throw stones and say we're peaceful people, because that doesn't work. So remember, get your membership. Expansions.com, less than $1 a day. Our September event, September Spectacular, is going to be spectacular as always. We already have people registered from all over the world. Space is limited. Register for that. So like, comment, subscribe, and share, because as I told you, the minute that our podcasts go up, YouTube is putting that limited viewership thing on it, and sometimes they take it off, sometimes they don't. So you are our best way to get our information out and let people know about expansions.com. So thank you for joining me. Until next time, bye-bye.